Hello and touch to all the class 12 students. In our previous video, we discussed about the differences between asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. We also saw the definition of reproduction. Iba dinge de ngazu video na ngazu kharu kola jang la wen na reproduction ki deshe diche definition diche and dije la ngazu ki sexual reproduction da asexual reproduction ni ki paragi kheba dita imba. And then we discussed some more details on asexual reproduction. Now, from this video onwards, we are going to discuss about sexual mode of reproduction. And in this video, we will talk about some general aspects of sexual reproduction. So the part 2 dinda. Okay, so sexual reproduction, what did I tell you about sexual reproduction? It involves the formation of male and female gametes. Now, here, these male and female gametes, it can be either produced by the same individual or by different individuals of the opposite sex. Male dan female gamete niga individual kansa chigi sue tunye yorwela no yorda. Hermaphrodites. Hermaphrodites la imba na khala gore an individual who can produce both male as well as female gamete. For example, hermaphrodite example kharchena digre earthworm chena digre. Right, earthworm, it has got both male as well as female reproductive organs, and they can produce both male gametes as well as female gametes. Right, so it is a form of sexual reproduction. The sexual reproduction earthworm, even though it can produce both male and female gametes, it rarely fertilizes its own egg with its own sperm. Earthworm, male the female gamete ni ga setu worda ine kora rangi konga di kora rangi sperm gi fertilize che di hukumbure. It cannot happen, right? So the zambala there should be involvement of two earthworms to produce new earthworm, right? So the zambala, it is a form of sexual reproduction. So sexual reproduction nalola there is production of two different gametes, male gametes like sperm and female gamete like egg. Sperm the egg need to produce chigre. And then in reproduction process, these two gametes, they fuse together to give rise to zygote, and zygote, it will develop into a new individual. Now here, unlike sexual reproduction, in sexual reproduction what happens is the new individuals produced, they are unique, genetically unique. Ta mi ga ji sperm da egg ni de zom ni mi chi de ke de ke ri de ni mi di phama ni do da yang ki marwa so ko koran la ni kejo manda ki do ni pingya nangu kejo da min do ti manda o jumze khare la wi na they are both unique, and we have discussed in class 11 why it is so, right? Sexual reproduction na lo la sperm the egg produce chi example khandis produce chi through meiosis, and during meiosis each of these gametes, they are unique in their own ways. Right, genetically they are unique. So dende into zambala kunyi ni zomba imba ina ani individual de kharchigre unique to produce chigre manda to produce chadur. So and therefore we say that sexual reproduction, it creates genetic variation, and genetic variation is very important for the survival of the species and for the evolution of the species. Is it clear? Right, because of variation, nature, they select the species or the individuals who are fit to survive in the conditions that is provided by the nature. Okay, so this sexual reproduction introduction to chaswa. Now there are different organisms, there are many organisms who reproduces through sexual mode of reproduction. They have got different modes of sexual mode of reproduction. The sexual mode of reproduction now will reproduce right? So the Zambala ani the common pattern right? What is the common pattern which is observed in sexually reproducing organisms? Right? So all sexually reproducing organisms, they have to pass through 3 phases in their life cycle. Right? 3 phases. Those 3 phases are juvenile phase or vegetative phase. Juvenile phase, it is used for animals, whereas vegetative phase, it is used for, the term is used for, especially for plants. So juvenile phase or vegetative phase, it is the period of growth and maturity. Organism reproduce first it needs to grow and attain sexual maturity, right? And that particular period from birth till it attains sexual maturity, it is called as juvenile phase or juvenile phase. And then at the end of the juvenile phase, the organism enters into reproductive phase, right? So during reproductive phase, the organism is able to reproduce through sexual mode of reproduction. So reproductive phase na ya juvenile phase zo wada and reproductive phase na zudur. In higher plants, the flowering process or the blooming the flowering process marks the end of vegetative phase. Zishin jila cha win ban zishin di chunju ni ma nyuguta ni ya ke du sama suen ni ya nyuguta ni ke wada lamsang ko haji do medo sharg min do ko haji do thangbu tis chembu cha and then shine medo sharg do medo shar wada ni ko khashine kharna zure reproductive phase na zure. In humans also, we don't start reproducing as soon as we are born, right? What happens is in humans, they have to enter puberty, right? So puberty, it marks the end of juvenile phase and entering into the reproductive phase. And then finally we have got senescent phase. Senescent phase after the end of reproductive phase, an organism, it reproduces, and then later on they grow old, right? And when it grows old, it cannot reproduce further, and then finally it will die, right? So it happens due to different changes in its metabolism, right? Metabolism slow cha doya dota ani cell ma bushi doya da dige kembe khachi gore yengo cha ni khachi gore thong du right? So in sexually reproducing organisms, let it be animals, plants, these three phases are common in all of them, right? They are commonly observed. Now let us discuss more about some examples. For example, as a human being, if you take the example of a human individual, right? When a baby child is born, right, and till he or she attains sexual maturity, puberty this is called as juvenile phase, right? And at around 10, 11, 12 age, at that particular age, the individual attains puberty, right? And sexually mature chare, right? That means at that particular age, he or she can reproduce, right? So reproductive phase na. Then afterwards, they will grow old and enter into senescent phase, and finally they will die. So this is sexually reproducing organism migala shisha phases tike sum didwa. And similarly, in plants also we can see these three phases, right? So juvenile phase, in case of plants, it is called as vegetative phase, right? And the vegetative phase, the khadu zore la yemena sishin la medo sharwata ani koi vegetative phase the zore the karna zure reproductive phase na la zure, right? And after reproduction, the plant will grow old and it will die, and that particular growing old process is called as senescent phase, right? Now among plants, right, plants are of different types: annual, biennial, and perennial lani khamanda sumyor. So plant nanglola khamanda sum nanglone annual and biennial plants chorwa tensu nanglola these three phases are more conspicuous lana khala ore ngosu deu yowa. It is very conspicuous, right? Ngosu deu peores. But in perennial plants, these three phases are not that conspicuous. Seu sheda yomar yo yorda ine seu sheda yomar demarcate chidu mar nganzuki. Right. So what do we mean by annual, biennial plants? Annual and biennial plants are those plants, right? For example, annual plant la a plant which grows only for one season. Lochik nanglola ke raw medoshar and lochik thara nanglo medoshar zawada ni shidwa annual plant la. Whereas biennial plants nanglola lo thangbu din nanglola ya chalong che lo niwa nanglola medoshar and lo niwa dina shidwa. So biennial la do ni annual lana lochik, biennial lana lo ni or 2 seasons. Whereas perennial plants, they can live for a very long period of time. So dige sumrida. Now for as an assignment, you can do a Google search and differentiate between annual, biennial, and perennial plants, and you should look for examples, some common examples. Example kine digre shingaji, or else you can take examples from your garden plants as well, right? But you have to define annual, biennial, and perennial, and then you have to give examples for each, right? 2 to 3 examples. Now, some unusual flowering phenomenon we will discuss about. 2 examples, right? Unusual flowering phenomenon. So plants, they can flower, right, once in their lifetime, right? Or annually insigre, biennially insigre, perennially insigre. In a plant khashish nanglola, the flowering mode is little bit unusual. This mandayor. bamboo species. In your textbook, it is given that bamboo species, they flower only once in their lifetime. Right? Lo mangbo degire de ne lore lore le medo shar dig marda. Khachire mizi nanglo la khu mizi legduta. Tishin digi lifespan nanglo la only once in a lifetime the bamboo, it flowers, it produces lots of fruit, and it dies. Right? So bamboo mixed chaswa, it flowers only once in their lifetime, right? Maybe after 50 to 100 years. Now there is another important example which is called as neelakuranji. Right? So neelakuranji la example this some na yaboshin nya. Right? So neelakuranji botanical name kharre Strobilanthus kunthiana. Right? Strobilanthus kunthiana or neelakuranji, it blooms once in every 12 years. Right? Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu gi ani sulle Western Ghat gi rijorwa hilly areas chomarwe di gangla the medo di shargdwa Strobilanthus kunthiana laidi ani in every 12 years, right, once every 12 years the hills, they become bluish or purple in color. During every once in every 12 years these flower, they bloom. Right? So this is called as mass flowering. Mass flowering lana sangmanyamdo khopta mewle medo shari wa jolo jungina themachik. So this, it produces very beautiful scenery and therefore it attracts lots of tourists ladwa. So kiran's board examination nanglola question le sigirta. Name the plant which blooms once every 12 years. Right? Or you can name, they can ask questions like name that plant which turns the tracts of Kerala, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, right, hilly tracts of Kerala, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka bluish in color. Example Strobilanthus kunthiana, and you have to remember that this particular plant flowers once in every 12 years, right? And the mass flowering observed, right, in September to October of 2006. 2006 la flowering chungla. Our textbook publication is old, so last time when the neelakuranji bloomed was in year 2006, September to October. Now let's talk a little bit more about animals. Right? Now animals, they can be seasonal breeders or they can be continuous breeders. Animals, they can either breed seasonally or continuously. Seasonal breeders are the animals who breed only during favorable seasons. It is observed mostly in wild animals which live in nature, right? So they breed only during favorable seasons. The season then the animal will breed so that their offsprings can survive. Right? There is better chances of their offspring surviving. Right? They are called as seasonal breeders. Whereas continuous breeders are those organisms or those animals which breed throughout their reproductive phase. So they are called as continuous breeders. Right? You can look for examples. Now the question is, what about us humans? Are we seasonal breeders or are we continuous breeders? That is an open question. You have to think about that. Right? Human beings like the seasonal breeder re, continuous breeder re. Okay. And one very important concept in this particular chapter is estrus and menstrual cycle. So these are the two important terms. These two cycles, estrus cycles, the silent rida. Estrus and menstrual cycles are cyclical changes that is observed in the reproductive organs of placental mammals. Female reproductive organs of female placental mammals. Female placental and mammals which produces or which shows placenta. Placenta mammal placental mammals and mammals female reproductive organs there is some kind of cyclical change. The estrus cycle is observed in non-primate mammals like cows, sheep, rats, deers, dogs, tigers. Mazugi kida shimida ni zizida ni zurwa tada shawada bhajuda ni zoyoro dige chaza nalo ngazo khari yor la wimbana, we observe something called estrus cycle. Right? Cats, they don't reproduce throughout the year. Right? Dogs, they don't reproduce throughout the year, maybe twice a year. Right? Why? Because the female, it undergoes estrus cycle. Right? And a menstrual cycle and a primates. Right? So female primates, they show menstrual cycle. Primates na khare tu da ani mergo da so apes na mergo da so la orangutan da so. So monkeys, apes and human beings the male sugar din all primates na all humans ke sugar. Humans are actually primates, right? So in primates, in female primates, we observe something called menstrual cycle, right? So menstrual cycle, the estrus cycle ni the loga khandes rela na estrus cycle is observed in these animals, non-primate mammals, whereas menstrual cycle is observed in primates, female primates. Okay, so this is very important. You can be asked questions like differentiate between estrus cycle and menstrual cycle. Now, the final topic of this particular video is now what actually controls the changes and transitions between these three phases: juvenile phase, reproductive phase, senescent phase, like the phase sum jor la so nalola, right? Lifespan nalola, sexually reproducing organism ki lifespan nalola, phase sum yoris, phase sum the khandes ligore, right? What controls the changes in the bodies of those organisms, right? What causes the transition of organism from one phase to the next? The answer is simple. It is nothing but the hormones. Hormones controls the changes in your body. But hormone chekbo marda. It requires some kind of environmental triggers, right? Environmental factor right? So because of these environmental factors and interaction of that with hormones, our bodily hormones, the reproductive process and the associated behavioral expressions of the organisms are regulated, right? So you control chigore hormone ta ani chilo gi environmental factor den zo ni interact chewe kengi ani organism sexually reproducing organism ki sobu nalo gi changes den zo control chitu gor right? Tanya gi din nalo la reproductive process ta kiran zo seuro hormone gi kembe gi reproductive process change khandes chagyo me de chela nga zo human reproduction nalo sewo be chagre behavioral expression nalo ke che wim by na. I can give the example of the leopards or snow leopards. Snow leopards, they are usually solitary. But when reproduce when the female comes in heat, she seeks out male. She leaves signs. So these at that time, these two individuals they come together. Normally they live separately. They prefer to live separately. They prefer to live alone. But during reproductive season, what happens is they two come close to each other. So they tolerate each other's presence. So this is behavioral change, right? So all these behavioral changes are brought about by hormones and its interaction with the environmental factors. All right, so this is the end of today's video. In the next video, we will discuss about some events in sexual reproduction. So please read about these events in sexual reproduction and you can watch the next video. Okay, thank you.